Blog Talk Radio.
All right, good evening, everybody, and welcome to Golf Talk Live. I'm your host, Ted Odorico, and we've got a great show for you tonight here on May the 4th of 2017 here on the Golf Talk Live program. And, of course, we are on the blogtalkradio.com network. Glad you could join us here during the live broadcast. And just to let everybody know, I'll give you the details here in just a second, how you can tune in each and every week and how you can share the information. But got a great show for you tonight. We're going to start out, of course, with a couple of great professionals here on Coach's Corner. Pete Buchanan and John Weir will be joining me here in just a moment. And then a little bit later on, my special guest this evening is somebody who's never been on the show, but have watched and followed his career over the years, a fellow Canadian, Mark Evershed. He's going to be joining me here, a fellow golf professional, and was also the Canadian PGA Teacher of the Year as well, and knew, of course, and followed Mo Norman and George Knudson, who were two great Canadian golfers, and he'll, I'm sure, tell you a little bit about them when he comes on the show as well a little bit later. But anyways, got a great show tonight. And just to remind everybody, of course, we are live from 6 to 8 p.m. Central or 7 to 9 p.m. Eastern for those of you on the East Coast. And best way to find us, of course, is go to blogtalkradio.com/Golf Talk Live, or just type Golf Talk Live up in the search key, and that will take you to the homepage there. And, of course, the show is front and center. But if you can't listen during the live broadcasts on Thursday nights, you can just go to that link, blogtalkradio.com/Golf Talk Live, and just scroll down to the on-demand section, and that's where all of the previously aired shows are auto-recorded and saved in that area there on the page, so you can just scroll down and listen to them when it's convenient for you. Or you can email any questions or comments to me at ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. Always love to hear from you, and especially those of you in the golf business, that if you're interested in being a guest on the show, or maybe you know somebody that is in the golf profession, maybe you'd like to hear on the program, you can certainly reach out to me and make me aware of that. And again, the email is ted.golftalklive@gmail.com. And, of course, update everything on social media. If you go to facebook.com and type in Golf Talk Live blog, you'll get the Golf Talk Live homepage there, and update each and every week all of my guests and the panelists on the Coach's Corner. And you can also like the page while you're there. Appreciate if you do that. And you can also follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Ted and Buck CEO, and that's CEO in capital letters. Thanks for all of the recent followers there on Twitter as well. And as I said, we're going to start off with a great show, Coach's Corner, each and every week, unless otherwise stated. And tonight I've got two great guys on the panel. Pete Buchanan, of course, has been with me many, many times on the show over the last several years. He's the founder and director of instruction and owner of Plain Simple Golf, which, of course, houses the Plain Simple Golf Circuit and Plain Simple Swing Repeater Training Brace. He's taught for 30 years plus in the business, so he's a very well-rounded and very experienced gentleman, and he has spent much of his career simplifying his golf swing philosophy in an effort to make it simple for players to play this game like you. John Weir, of course, has been on the show for a little while, but he's joining me back here on the panel as well, and he's the director of Mental Golf Academy and mental performance coach. He is also a mental performance coach to elite junior, collegiate, and professional golfers from around the world, and is the developer and head researcher of the Mental Golf Type System, and also authored two great books, Golfer's Guide to Mental Fitness and the creator of the Mental Caddy Subconscious Conditioning Program. So lots of accolades there. Guys, welcome to Coach's Corner.
Thanks for having me, Ted. Great to be here.
All right, not a problem. Anyways, guys, as I mentioned to you off air, what I wanted to do here, since there was just the two of you tonight, is I did a little research and pulled a few things. And Pete, I'm going to start with you if that's okay. A few things just from your own websites I thought would be kind of interesting to talk about, since you guys have gone to great lengths of making it available to your followers and students and so forth. So, Pete, I'm going to start with you here, as I said. And the first thing that I want to talk about is creating a simple, and this is an article that you wrote actually April 16th of this year, simple, repeatable ball control with distance. Explain first off what you mean by that and how you help your students and the listeners in the show tonight accomplish just that.
Well, over the years of looking at the golf swing, it was a great run for me with the John Jacobs schools because we got to see so many, to thousands and thousands of golf swings. And so I began to look at it to try to take it to its simplest form to get the most out of the control without having to sacrifice any distance with it. And what I found was the more we kept the club swinging parallel to the original shaft angle from the address through the swing, the more control we had. And it did not do anything to the distance. As a matter of fact, for the most part, we got more. It changed the way the club was approaching the ball from a more shallow attack, which allowed the shaft to work a lot easier. But by keeping that there and also by, really calming the hands down and keeping the angle form between the shaft and the lead arm the same, it just, I started experimenting with it and with my own game and just kept the control was just unbelievable. So, I began to bring it into my students and that's basically where the whole thing evolved from. And that's how my training aid got involved with it too. I developed that because it was a catalyst piece to help keep that lead angle between the arm and the shaft the same. And that's really how it all evolved. So by doing that, I was able to get not only great ball control and contact, but keep distance in the swing as well.
Well said. John, I also equally visited your site as well and looked at a couple of great articles. One particular caught my eye, and you started off by saying every golfer needs goals, and then you break down really 5 types to set for your game. And I want to go through, we'll go through a couple here, and then we'll go back to Pete, and then come back here just because I know it'll take you a few moments to go through each one of them and that. But let's do the first 2 here. First off, explain why it's important, in your opinion, to really set goals and give a breakdown of the 5 goals. Maybe you can just sort of head them out, and then we'll talk about a couple of them in this round. How's that?
Sounds good. Well, first off, having goals obviously is very important, not only in practice but also going out to play. And we like to break down, at least for the players going out onto the courses, they're divided up between kind of having outcome goals and process goals. And our outcome goals is obviously going to be, where do we want to finish in the event, or, what's our main goal for entering the event. And our process goals is basically going to indicate where our on-course focus is going to be. And these are going to be our goals on the course, such as, let's say, staying in a positive frame of mind, committing to making smart decisions, and sticking to your shot process. So once we break down the outcome goal, we try to break it down into those 3 process goals, and that's our on-course focus. The goal for the outcome would be used off the course. So a great mental exercise people do is they visualize the end happening. So maybe that's them signing in a card and getting their first win, or going off the course and setting a new low or a birdie number that they were shooting for. And then they could mentally go through that image and see themselves working those process goals or getting down to the business of getting it done on the course. So those are our 2 real primary goals. And I think that if we go out there and don't have a direction, we're really putting ourselves behind the 8 ball. So setting a good goal, giving your brain a direction on what you're playing for, can increase your commitment and confidence out there.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And that's obviously something we're going to talk about that a little bit more in here in just a second about, one of the reasons that I think a lot of people, and I hate to use the term fail, but, out on the golf course because they don't set any goals when they get out there. They just sort of haphazardly navigate their way around the golf course without any sort of real intent or a short-term goal or even a long-term goal for the season. And ultimately just end up, floundering for most of it. Pete, I want to go back to you here. to talk about the sort of the simplicity versus mechanical. As an example, we hear a lot of swing theories out there with a lot of the players, and a lot of the coaches out there as well can get very mechanical in their instruction. Why do you feel it's important to keep it a little bit more simple as opposed to, a lot of the mechanical techniques that we see out in some of the teaching?
Well, for the most part, when people playing golf, there's not much you can think about while you're playing in the first place. So we need to keep it down to as simple as possible. You could detail out every inch of the swing, but there are certain things that are going to happen on their own anyway. And so I've never felt it was necessary to think about those things. I want to get the big things done so the little things take care of themselves. So I stick to the simple idea of the ball's to the side and on the ground. We have to set up in a fashion that's going to allow us to move and balance. And the club has to swing side to side and up and down. Now, the ball's been to the side and on the ground since the game began, and that's never changed. So we always have to look at, the simplest way to move the golf club so we can achieve the proper impact. So my first question to the players always is, what do you want the ball to do? And so I know what we're trying to achieve. And then I ask them, do you know how to achieve that? And if they don't, we'll explain, what's necessary, what impact is necessary to get the ball flight they want. And then let's take the simplest, most direct route to making that happen on a repeated basis. And so, I always liked to listen when I was with the school. I love to listen to John because, he really taught me how to make one change that affected 8 other things. And so you can really just get right down to the root causes and really keep it very simple in the focus of what the golf swing is all about. And I just found that got players, along a lot further in a faster time than worrying about all the details. Now, it's not to say that I haven't used the details, because I have some of my players that are extremely mechanical. They want to know every move. And I said, well, I'll tell it to you. But when we practice, we're not going to dwell on those. We're going to look at the few simple things that are going to allow you to get done what needs to be done. And so that when you get to the golf course, you're on autopilot. So you don't have to worry about those things. And so that's why I've always kept it to a very simple basis.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. And I, just to further point, John, I want to get your thoughts on this as well. I think one of the important things, I think people do need to understand the various positions through the golf swing, but really impact is the most important position, because how you get the club to impact is really up to you. And the reason why I say that is if you look at players like, and I've used this example many times, Lee Trevino and many others that had very unorthodox swings compared to many others in the tour, but their impact position was always the same, essentially, as everybody else's. And I think, John, you would probably agree that, whether you're Freddie Couples that maybe takes it a little bit more on the outside and then loops it around, or somebody like a Lee Trevino that has, again, a unique swing, as long as they're bringing it into the proper position at impact, it really doesn't matter so much the backswing as it does at impact, and then obviously follow through. Do you agree with that, John?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's the same with the mental approach. I don't think taking away sometimes the player's individual nuances is a good thing. And, in our programs, we base it around people's individual personality types, and we coach every player different. So I would agree. I think the moment of truth impact and the results, if we're predictable with it, and I think having a little personal nuance in there or your natural move isn't a bad thing.
Yeah, and I think that one of the issues that I see in today's, and this is going to be open to really both of you, is, again, I don't have an issue with somebody being taught the basic mechanics of the golf swing, but I think that when a player is being forced to get into certain positions throughout the golf swing, and it may not be a natural flow for that particular individual, I think can actually be detrimental to their game. I mean, everybody has a unique flow or ebb and flow of their own golf swing, and there are certain constants within the swing. But again, how somebody does the golf swing, whether they, again, take it more on the outside or more on the inside, is really indicative to each individual style. But as long as those other key positions, like particularly impact, are uniquely the same, then I think you could throw away the argument that everybody has to be an Iron Byron as an example. And I think unfortunately, golf instruction for a long, long time started to become very regimented in its teaching. And I think that a lot of people got frustrated because they just couldn't get into those perfect positions every time. Pete, what are your thoughts there?
Well, there was a great post I saw the other day, and looking at one of the Facebook groups, and they were talking about if Dustin Johnson showed up on your tee, what would you change? And I said, well, I'd watch him hit first, and after watching that, I wouldn't change anything. After watching that ball flight, you'd just say, hey, let's go to the golf course. This is phenomenal. So you really have to look at, what are their abilities to hit it first? What can they do? And then take it from there. So that way you're always letting, what they're able to do come out. Now, if they're not getting the ball flight that's necessary, then you can go through, the steps to create that. There are some times when you have to talk about, where a golf club goes, a certain quote-unquote position of where it is, because that particular position could be, from a better part of what's happening, the cause of why their shots are doing what they're doing. So you have to make a change there. A great example of that is I had a gentleman that I was working with a couple of weekends ago. He needs 2 knee replacement surgeries. He needs a new hip. He can't move around very much. But, we took the address position, and I made some significant adjustments to the address so that we could get the golf club to go where it needed to go, so we could fix the impact. So, you have to understand a little bit of cause and effect of what is going to happen, what makes the ball do what it does, and then you can always keep it on a pretty simple basis. But, yeah, I mean, you want somebody to be a robot out there, but on the other hand, I know somebody always talks about, well, you should just leave their natural swing there. Well, if their natural swing is making them shoot 140, well, we got some troubles here.
Right.
But somehow we're going to have to make some adjustments. So, I mean, yeah, natural swing is, if they can't, contact the ball with it, then it's probably not very natural anyway. But, I mean, I get what you're saying, but there's going to be times you have to make some adjustments.
Sure, and I agree with that. I think that, and I think what really people that are referring to their more natural swing is that, everybody's body rhythms and timing is different. And I think that's really what they're getting through. Another example is not so much, the direction of the swing or necessarily the plane of the swing. Again, maybe a taller player might have more of an upright and a shorter player might have a little bit flatter swing plane. But I think what they're talking about too is really the individual rhythm of the player. For example, if you look at a player like Nick Price, who was a very quick-paced swinger, if you will, of the club, and then you compare it to somebody like an Ernie Els or a Freddie Couples that was a little more smooth. They're still both types are generating tremendous club head speed, but they're just a different tempo and different timing in their rhythm. And I think that if you've got somebody that swings like an Ernie Els and you try to speed them up like a Nick Price or somebody else that has a little quicker pace out there, then you're going to throw them off their natural rhythm. And I think that's going to create a lot of issues. And I think that's something, too, that I think a lot of individuals need to understand. When they see maybe their favorite player on TV and, they want to emulate that swing, that certain key elements might be okay. But if that individual they're watching is, say, swings like an Ernie Els, and maybe this individual that's watching him has a quicker pace like Nick Price, then it's not going to be probably conducive for him to try and copy Ernie Els' swing. Maybe certain key elements, but not the whole rhythm and timing of it. John, I want to go back to and finish up on the goals. I know you had a few more there. Talk about some of the remaining goals and the importance that they play in preparation as well.
Which ones in particular did you want to go over? I'm trying to recall the other ones that I've listed.
Yeah.
Is it more of your practice goals and things like that?
Yes.
Well, I'll just bring up one of the pitfalls that I see that players make in practice. And one of them is players aren't practicing with the right challenge point out there and enough consequence. And I think that if we can set a goal, target goals for things to achieve out on the practice ranges, one, practice with a lot of intent, but always be practicing and playing for something. So once you're out of your repetition or your block style practice, I love for my players to set some goals and some challenges for themselves. And if they fail to reach that, then we bring in a consequence, like a fitness challenge or something to that effect. That way the players are starting to practice with the conditions that they're going to be playing events in and having something on the line with each shot. And I think that having good practice goals like that and bringing the consequence into play is effective for a lot of people. And we just don't see enough of that. And also taking the practice out onto the golf course. You know, if you and your coach work out that your approach shots from, 150 to 170 range or off, I encourage players to get actually into the course to do some of that on-course practice. Skip the tee shot, go drop some balls around 150, 160, 170, play an approach shot in, and see if you can convert it for bird. Because on the course, what we see is we actually get into a variable environment, and we can actually start testing ourselves a little bit more. Being at the range is a constant environment, and golf's one of those only sports where people aren't doing like a scrimmage type of practice enough. If we were playing basketball, we would run the other team's defense and do some simulation. And I think that if players can get into building in some goals for doing some on-course simulation of areas that they need to work on, they'll make improvements a lot faster.
Yeah, and I agree with that as well. I think that you have to change it up. What some of the things that I try to do is, with some of the corporate students that I work with, I will take them out on the golf course, and I very, very seldomly, unless they're doing things right, will I give them an even lie. I try to give them and a lot of them don't like it at first, especially if they're first starting to work with me, because they're saying, well, boy, that's a pretty steep slope there. And I said, well, that's what you're going to expect when you're out in the golf course. And you're not always going to get a nice, perfect, fluffy lie like you'd have at the practice range. So, or you're not always going to have it teed up, other than on the tee box. You're not going to have it teed up out in the middle of the fairway. So, so I try to create realistic simulations that many amateur golfers, and the reason why I do that is because most amateur golfers aren't hitting it out in the center of the fairway. They're hitting it, in the short rough, or they're hitting it into trouble, or especially some of your higher handicappers. So I want to make sure that the simulations that they're getting are realistic to what their level of play is. Now, as they get better, then obviously, I'm going to back off a little bit, but I want them to experience that. And it leads to my next point for you, Pete, is pushing people outside of their boundaries. I think in both practice and play, I think it's important that people don't get into too much of a comfort zone every time they're working with us, because I think then that builds, certainly we want consistency, but I think if they get too comfort and are not pushed beyond their limits sometimes, they're not going to adapt and overcome some of the fears and some of the challenges that they're faced with. What do you try to do with some of your students, Pete, to get them to do that?
Well, many times I always ask them, what's the club you don't like to hit? Let's get that out. Let's get you uncomfortable right from the beginning, and so we can, kind of sort of get some kind of a course condition and see how they react to, a golf club that's not very, very fun for them as far as they're concerned to play with. But I also like to kind of get some background on them, and when they're playing, ask them the situations. If you're standing on the tee and there's water left and out of bounds right, what's going to happen to you? And even at one point in time, I took a gentleman who was so afraid of the 14th hole because there's a gully, and I said, well, how far is it to the green? He said, well, it's 160 yards. I said, well, good. Let's hit it 110 and just keep plunking them in the gully. It's not that big of a deal. He was so terrified of hitting them in there. I said, well, I'll even give you some old balls. Let's just get over the fear of hitting in the gully. Let's hit a few in there. So right. Try to get them, over those obstacles as best you can. But, I always like to take them, and especially in the short game, and put them in situations that I know that, like you said, it's not always sitting right on the fringe they can chip off of. Let's go over here and, put it down in the deep grass and figure out how we're going to get this out of here. So put them in as many situations as you can. And I agree with what John was talking about, on course, get out there on the golf course and put yourself in those situations. It's just going to help you learn so much faster. And, and in many cases, get over some of those, comfort situations and some of those fears of what you have.
Exactly. And, something else, Pete, that I try to do with some of my students, and I'm sure you've done similar, is, they'll get to, 110 or 120 yards from the green, and I'll sort of be their caddy, and they'll say, okay, well, hand me my wedge, and instead I'll hand them a 7-iron or a 6-iron, and tell them I want them to execute that 120-yard shot with a different club. Now they've got to, get the men, and this is, John, really is going to be a question for you, but I get them to change it up because, again, they're going to go for what their sort of stock shot, their 120-yard wedge or 110-yard wedge, whatever they're hitting. Now they've got to convert and use a different club. Now they've got to improvise. They've got to use a little bit of the old noggin upstairs to figure out how they can manufacture a shot with a club that normally they might hit 150 to 165 yards, depending on their abilities, and how they can accommodate that. And I also, a lot of times I'll do it where there's not an option to bump and run it up, so they can't just bump and run the shot and get it onto the green that way. Sometimes they might have to fly it over. So, again, they've got to use a little improvisation there. And that brings me to a point for you, John, is, as we get into the season now, as we're starting to open wide into a brand new season, I'm sure you're doing a lot of things, especially with some of your juniors, to get them prepared mentally for the season and to be able to face some of the challenges they might be, coming up against throughout the year. So what are some things that you do from the mental side of things, or tune-up, if you will, to get them ready for the new season?
Well, first off, I will always remind them what our definition of success is. And for us, this definition of success is taking action. So we really impart on the kids to get up, take action, go pursue the goals. And we equate failure to lack of action or kind of sitting around. So what we really try to impart on people facing the ups and downs of golf is that success is in action, and every time we're taking action, we're succeeding because we're either going to get validated and achieve our goal or we're going to get educated. So one of the things I want to remind them of is getting them into the proper growth mindset to be able to handle the challenges as well as the good stuff. And that's really the approach we take. So oftentimes after their rounds or they're coming off the course, we do a lot of, what do we do well and what do we learn? And we try to keep it into that mindset. The other thing is we really reinforce our basic play strategies. And for us, it boils down to the 3 Ps, we call it. One, being positive. And when I'm talking about being positive, it doesn't mean like you got to be smiling and giggling around the golf course. I mean, we never saw Tiger Woods do that, but we could all agree that Tiger was a positive thinker. And when we're thinking positive, It's really about, one, being positive in our targets and setting a clear strategy for each shot. So rather than an avoidance strategy like don't go in the gully, like that one guy probably says all the time, we really want to get clear on what our target is and what our strategy and be positive in that regard, as well as being positive in our self-efficacy, our ability to go out and get the job done. And so that's one of our Ps, and I preach to the players that we always have to win in that department. Second P is patience. A lot of our kids go out there sometimes try too hard or try to force things, or they get down because they didn't convert a birdie opportunity. So we really preach a lot of patience out there. Patience in your process, your shot process, patience on the course, and letting the round unfold without us trying to, manipulate or script it out in our head, And finally, it's going to be our shot process. And for us, that's really what we try to get across to the kids, get them process-driven rather than so obsessed with score. Because process is really about getting down and doing the business, and if we do that at a high level and we're bringing really confident, committed processes to each shot, the chance of us having a low score increases dramatically. So our goal is getting those process numbers up, and we teach them based on their brain what they need to do in each one of the zones in order to qualify for an effective process. And we really work on trying to get them up over 80-90% with that. And those are some great ways of kind of going out and approaching any round of golf or even the journey of golf. If we're staying positive, we're staying patient, and we just keep working that process to mastery, we're going to get ahead on the course and we're going to get ahead in life.
Yeah, great points. Thank you, John. Pete, obviously, in addition to our high handicappers, I know you're working with some higher caliber golfers as well. How does it differ working with them? Obviously, it's a little easier in some ways, but what are some things that you work with some of your better golfers out there? Obviously, you don't have to maybe focus on the mechanics or on some of the general fundamentals, if you will, with them as often. But obviously you need to keep them. What are some of the common concerns and questions that some of the better players have when you're working with them? What are they working on?
It's great what John just talked about with process, because there's a lot of times in going through the development of where we're taking them with their golf swings and what we're trying to achieve, that they lose sight of the process. And then they begin to practice and they don't do the things that they should be doing. And I'm always on them about sticking to the process. We've got these individual drills and goals that we set up for you, and you have to stick to that. And, and I really like what he was talking about with those three things. And the patience part is really, really tough for me. Going through the process of drills and working on different areas, sometimes it can be monotonous, but in the end, it's what they need. And so it's really getting them to stay focused on what the goals are, what we're trying to achieve, and continuing to perform that process that we put in place. And with the newer players, it's really about getting them an understanding of what they're trying to do. To me, that's really the big part. It's hard to get them into a process if they don't understand what they're doing in the first place. So with new players, I'm always about the first thing I tell them in every situation we go to us is, what are we trying to do? The ball's 10 yards off the green, the pin's over there. What do we want the ball to do? And I'm always getting them to understand what the ball needs to do, what the club has to do to achieve that ball flight, and what do I have to do to make the club do that. And I'm always working them in that segment all the time. So it's from the ball to the club to the player. And that way they get an understanding of what they're trying to do, and it makes it easier for them in the end, as we're going along, to put forth a process of practice to make it work. And so it gives them a good understanding of what's necessary, and then we can begin to start to build more things for them to do.
Yeah, some great points as well, Pete. Thank you. John, on the subject of elite or some of our better players out there, obviously you work with that category as well as some of the newer golfers out there. What do you do in a situation where you've got a high caliber player, ball striking is not an issue, but for some reason their game has become derailed and they're just not making things happen out in the golf course? Obviously that's an internal issue. It's not a physical issue. So you've got to kind of get into that golfer's head a little bit, find out what he's struggling, he or she is struggling with. How do you handle a player like that when you've got a high caliber player that is playing at the highest level out there, but for some reason it's just not happening? How do you coach them through that process and get them into the winning track?
Well, the first thing that we're going to do is, going back to what I was saying earlier, we eliminated the whole idea of a one-size-fits-all approach. Universally, I could tell you what's preventing their performance, and universally it's the same thing. It's stress and going into the stress response. And stress isn't like the normal competitive pressure, but it's kind of that scale of anxiety to fearful. But basically it's the stress response to fight or flight that's taking place in their brain that's preventing their performance. And the reason why is when we're operating with our best functions and we're feeling good about ourselves, we actually have access to both hemispheres of our brain, and we're using the upper part of our brain. So we're able to perceive things in the right perspectives. We're making good decisions. And then as far as the golf swing goes, we have full access to our motor cortex, and there's no interference going on. So all of our synchronistic muscle movements, the timing, the rhythm of the swing, all that's intact. However, when a player's starting to go into stress and the fight or flight response is going off in the brain literally shifts and it kind of works down and it dominates in the limbic system. And when that takes place, there's a change in their perception. So they view themselves in a different light, their golf game, their swing. They're making different decisions out of stress. And then as it relates to the motor cortex, it's literally getting inhibited. So a lot of those, fine muscle motions or motor programs and the quick twitch and things like that actually are being impaired by the brain. So what we do is we put them through a system we developed that determines which of the 16 mental golf types they are. So universally, everybody's going into a stress state, but what sets that stress state into motion is going to be subjective based on the individual. So we look at the human element of that, and we evaluate some facets of their personality, to determine what their primary gifts are and what their least developmental functions are. And what's been interesting, Ted, is that there's predictable patterns that we go into when we're using our brain properly based on your type, and also the predictable patterns of stress that a player goes into. And so we do the mental fitting, we get them aware and start keying them in on their gifts and strengths. And, you know, the ironic thing is we do our gifts so naturally that we think everyone else does it that way. And it just isn't the case. So keying a person in on their mental strengths, like keying them in on the right motion in the golf swing, just that alone can start changing their process and their play, and also bringing up what their stress side is. And usually from there, people are already starting to make some shifts and connect the dots. I mean, my job isn't to really teach people new things. My job is to help people discover themselves. And this hardwiring that we're talking about, it's built in like your handedness. So I'm always going to be a right-handed person. I might learn to get better with my left, but I'll always be a dominant righty. And so that's step one, is key them in on their dominant preferences and then what their mental left hand is. And after that, we start working and building it into the process and seeing where their gap is in the routine. And then we'd address some of the belief systems. And that's where tools like hypnosis or NLP could come in to help kind of clear away some of the belief systems and start rebuilding the self-image. So, sorry for the long-winded answer.
Yeah. No, that was perfect. And that's exactly what I was looking for is, you know, this is the whole purpose of Coach's Corner, is really to get into areas, you know, I've said this many times before, you know, I don't want the panel discussions to be about, you know, fixing the common swing, you know, ailments that most golfers have all the time, because, you know, there's only so many times and there's only ways that you can talk about fixing some of the common issues that people deal with, like fixing the slice and that, because it usually relates back to a much bigger issue. And a lot of times, you know, people are looking for these quick fixes. And the truth of the matter is, and Pete, I know you can attest to this as well, if a golfer wants to truly improve, there's a number of things that they need to do. And unfortunately, most golfers out there aren't willing to do some of the things that are necessary, and they want that sort of Band-Aid to get them through. It's almost like, and I hate to use this analogy, but it's almost like a drug addict. You know, they want to get that next fix. So they're searching the internet, they're looking, you know, watching video after video to see how they can get that next fix. And then you get out there and it might work temporarily, but they haven't really got to the root cause yet. And this is, you know, Pete, what my question for you is how do we, you know, sort of flick that switch in our players to get them to realize that going after the quick fix is not going to be a long-term solution?
Well, you know, many times if you're just talking to them and they've had some problems with impact, problems with different shot patterns, and those continue to come and continue to show up, it gives them a pretty good idea that they haven't really gotten to the root cause yet. They haven't really fixed what's really given them the problems that they have. And so, I mean, I like, you know, that you're bringing it this way, because that's, you know, pretty much the basis of what I do. I'm all about cause and effect and finding the one thing that's given them fits to what they're doing. You know, and it goes into, you know, a common deal about, you know, fears and inhibited. You know, a prime example, another gentleman I just worked with showed up, and you know, you guys have 5-iron in his hand. There's a green right out in the center of the range. It's 150 yards. I said, just aim at the center of that green. And he sets up, you know, 80 yards left of it. Well, I have a pretty good idea this guy's afraid of going to the right, you know. And so instinctively, what a lot of people would do would square him up first. Well, he's going to be terrified if you do that. He's already afraid of going to the right, so he's aiming 80 yards left. So what I went and looked at him, I had him hit a few shots, and of course, you know, they start way left and curve to the right. And, you know, I said, you know, have you ever understood why your ball curves to the right? No, all I've ever had to do is make room for it. And so what I did immediately is I went in and fixed the reason why it was curved. Well, now they're all flying 80 yards left. Well, it's really easy process now to work with him to square him up, because the ball's not going right anymore. And so to a certain extent, you know, when you're talking about the cause and effect and the process that it goes through, I mean, it's pretty easy when when you're talking to them and their problems keep coming. I love your analogy about the Band-Aid. You know, there are some great Band-Aids out there, but, you know, they all fall off eventually. And it's, you know, you've probably seen one of the things I wrote in there about a virus. You know, every swing has one, and it creates symptoms. And, you know, the symptoms are always going to stay there until you get to the virus. So, you know, if those symptoms keep coming back, you know, you can sort of walk in through with them and say, you know, look, you really haven't gotten to the root yet because, you know, you keep searching and keep searching for that, you know, that quick fix, and you're not finding it because you're not fixing the right part.
Yeah, and it also goes to, and well said, and that's exactly was my point. You know, the issue is that a lot of the golfers that we tend to work with that are high handicap or you know, newer to the game tend to make the same mistakes over and over again, but yet expect a different result. And what they don't realize that if you keep doing that and repeating those same mistakes time and time again, but expect a different result, you're never going to get anywhere. And so what they're trying to do is they're trying to, you know, do something that they can do relatively quickly. That's not going to take a lot of time. And it's the same thing as like working out. You know, if you go to the gym once a week as opposed to 3 times a week, you're going to see less results going once a week than you will 3 times a week. Even if you're not doing a great routine, just by volume and repetition, you're going to see some you know, results. They may not be significant depending on your routine, but you are going to see more results going 3 times a week than just going once a week. And I think that people have to understand that it's a commitment. To learn this game is a commitment. And, you know, that's another mental hurdle, I'm sure, John, that you face with some of the newer golfers out there that take up this game and maybe play for a couple of years and they're kind of getting burnt out. They're not seeing a lot of improvement. You know, you want to try to give them a soft pillow to land on, but at the same time, you have to give them a little bit of a nudge and a push. So how do we give them a push and a nudge, if you will, to get them on the right track, to see results, to have some success? What do we do mentally to get them their minds in the right you know, frame of mind?
Well, I think to give them the push, what you want to help them connect with is the why factor. And I think that if you can discover why it's important to them to make the progress, and we can tap into some emotional current with that, that will be your starting point to get them motivated. And going back to what Pete's saying, I think sometimes it's just that they don't understand the cause and effect. So things like video and things where you can bring it up and show them is a good thing. But I think what it boils down to at the end of the day is people don't like to look bad at the driving range. And so they don't want to go and put in the work because they're afraid of being embarrassed or looking bad. But we want to see the driving range as not as a performance center, but as a learning place and almost like a laboratory where we can go and experiment. And I just think that a lot of times people aren't progressing or they burn out because they're trying to go down some old practice methods that just won't pay off. You know, for them to just go and rake and hit balls for 50 minutes or an hour, it's just unproductive time, and there's no retention in that type of practice. And all they do is get quicker and quicker and quicker. Where if they learn to slow down a little bit and they weren't having their ego so involved with the driving range and looking bad, if we can find that why factor and push them there and also encourage them to say, let's make the driving range in this practice facility a place of experimentation, and I want you just to keep working these moves, I think we'll get a little bit more out of them. I'm in a pretty blessed position. Most of the players that I work with are all on major competitive circuits, so they come in very motivated and very driven. But we still sometimes run into the same problems where they want to tinker or get off track. So what I encourage people to do is get the ego out of the way and pursue the mastery and work on those bad shots there. So when we get to the course, we're actually able to click and make some better things happen. But to get them motivated, it's always comes back to their why. And if you can get an emotional why factor there, I think we'll at least get them to the range and at least put in some more time in.
I'm going to ask you guys each the same question, and I'm just curious how you how you perceive this. But let's take a player, and we'll use Tiger because he was certainly someone that was very vocal, or not vocal, but physical about his changes and that. And another person that was very similar, but for different reasons, was Nick Faldo. But there are two players there that made substantial swing changes throughout their careers. What do you think they were looking for? Obviously, they know that no person is ever going to have the perfect golf swing. But in your mind, Pete, what do you think a player that comes in and certainly a great ball striker, hits phenomenal golf shots, plays well out there, wins tournaments, what do you think they're looking for when they're continually making changes? And then, John, I want you to answer that as well from your perspective.
Well, I think it's kind of nature in all of us to want to be the best we can be and to be, strive to continue to get better. I think to a certain extent, Tiger's a little bit of a perfectionist, and even though he was really good at what he was doing, he wants to get better, and no other reason that I see for them other than they're just trying to continue to improve to master what's going on. I think the difference between somebody like Faldo and somebody like Tiger is Tiger, through injuries, I don't think was able to go and continue to make the changes as Nick was. But Nick is a very mechanical, very, I would say regimented type of processor. And Tiger, is one that, he's very powerful in what he does, but he also just wants to be the best. And so I think, in those regards, I think that was the driving force behind making changes, is just trying to get better.
Yeah,
I would second
John,
that, for sure.
Yeah, do you think also, too, that, John, that maybe there was a little, and I don't think ego would necessarily play in either one's, because I don't think they're really thinking about that, but do you think sometimes some players at that level, in addition to, being perfectionists, obviously, in the forefront of it, but also that they're never satisfied with the results? They're always wanting to push themselves just that little bit more. Do you think that plays in it as well?
Without a doubt, and especially with someone like Tiger and the drive that he has, I think that they're always just looking for that competitive edge, and they always think that they could be that much better. I mean, it'll be funny because the first person that shoots the 54 will probably come off and say, I left that eagle out there. It could have been a 53, and I feel like a lot of those guys like Tiger and Faldo who've reached the highest level, and they just have this tenacity and this intrinsic drive to be the very best and achieve mastery with what they're doing. And I really think it's just that and maybe looking for a competitive edge where the new coach had said something to them that resonated and make enough to make a trip with them, or make that jump.
I don't know, guys. Do we really want to see somebody shoot a 54? I mean, 59 was bad enough, but 54, I mean, that's just a whole level, of game that, as Jack put, that I'm not familiar with. I mean, how low is enough? I mean, obviously our goal is to shoot in the lowest scores, but I mean, there comes a point in time where if you get to such a level that you're consistently shooting scores that low, you've almost, I won't say you've mastered the game, but you've gotten to a point where what else is there left to do? Are you even having fun at that point anymore? Either one of you, go ahead.
Well, I think, when you get there could be a certain part of that. I mean, you look at somebody like Tiger with what he's achieved, what he's done. There could be a little bit that now with his injuries. It's like, what do I have left to prove? I mean, I had a great run. And, I know in the back of his mind, those 18 majors are still sitting there. But, at this point in time in his life, with his kids, with his business, with what's going on, the motivation has changed. It's a lot like in any other sport. You get a guy who struggled his whole life and he worked hard. He gets to the major leagues. He has a great run, gets a huge contract, and becomes mediocre. Because, hey, I made it. Yeah. I got here. My goal was to get here, and I'm here. And a lot of them don't have that instinctive drive that we're talking about with Faldo and Tiger and Michael Jordan and those guys that are they are so just work to be the best, and they're going to work and work and work. Larry Bird shooting 1,000 jump shots every day. That's a different breed of athlete, but they're out there. But I think, it's just a matter of, I don't know, just to strive, as I think John mentioned, to be the best.
Do you think as average players that the rest of us, when we see that, can be a double-edged sword? It can be a source of inspiration, but can also be have the opposite effect as well, have an unrealistic expectation on ourselves when we see. I mean, obviously, I'm not expecting to be Tiger Woods or Jack Nicklaus or anybody like that. But when we see players that just reach such abilities, do you think that some players out there that push themselves and obviously are not going to get to that level for whatever reason, that sometimes kind of deflates the tire a little bit? John, what do you think about that theory?
Well, at the end of the day, those people are going to reach their pinnacle, which would be a great achievement in and of itself. So I think a person who's pursuing some lofty goals and leaving it all out on the table, even if they don't reach it, they're going to be developed into a very successful person, I think, overall. I think the challenge that it runs into, I mean, we're constantly keeping players' expectations in check and working on keeping them in a place where they're realistic, yet pushing them, and something that doesn't become a big burden. What I see the problem is a lot of the parents of our young juniors and competitive players, where they have this expectation that the Jordan Spieths are, hundreds or thousands of them around the world, right, and their kids won. And most of their kids aren't going to win a major at 16, but they can certainly burn out. And I think keeping some of the parents in check with understanding that, like a Spieth and Tiger, they're prodigies. I mean, they're the anomaly. And otherwise, prepare for a long journey for your kid pursuing professional golf. So I think that's where it becomes a little more detrimental, because the parents bring unnecessary expectations to the table. The kids can't fulfill it, and then they got rifts at home because the kids feel like they let down their parents, and they feel like, I'm putting all this work, and why can't I get ahead? So I see it more from there. I mean, as an athlete, you want them to have that drive and the tenacity, and I'll never tell anybody their goal's too big, that just to go for it. And,
sure.
I think at the end of the day for them, they're going to turn out and be very happy with what they were able to achieve. I just hate to see the young kids burn out too soon with some of the parents' expectations.
Yeah, and that really brings to the key point, is it needs to be the kids' or the child's goal, not the parent's goal. It has to be what they want. If they want to set a goal based on their own individual drive or desires, then that's okay. But you're right, and we hear of this often. Especially at some of these bigger golf schools that attract a lot of junior players. One of the biggest complaints that I hear talking with some of the people working at these facilities is that the parents are just relentless. I mean, they're just constantly after the kid to get out there, and when they're not, hitting the mark, if you will, it's just there's just so much pressure that's being placed on these students that even most adults couldn't handle that much pressure, let alone a 10, 12-year-old child. So you're exactly right. I think that we have to encourage them with their goals and help them along, but keep them realistic as well. And you're right. Not everybody's going to be a Tiger or a Jack or a Nick or Jordan Spieth or any of those other players that reach that high caliber. They are
and at
very
such a young age,
and,
too. You look at Lydia at such a young age, and then it sets this precedent like, well, that's possible for my child. And that's where some things get a little out of whack pretty quick. So,
well look at Tiger, too.
I mean, yeah.
I'm sorry, Ted, go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, I was just going to say, go ahead, Pete.
Well, I mean, think of one thing before Tiger Woods. He won 6 straight amateur championships, 3 junior, 3 regular. Who else did that? Nobody.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you could just see the writing on the wall with what was coming. I mean, this kid is just, as you said, he's the anomaly. I mean, it's just an amazing run. To think anybody's just going to turn out to be him is a little bit far-fetched. I mean, that's just a phenomenal run that he had, and he was still an amateur. Unbelievable.
Well, and you look at, and you take, on the other side of the spectrum, you take a player like Jack. Jack really did not become a great golfer until much later. I mean, he was not a child prodigy. I mean, he wasn't out there, at 3 years old, on the putting green, like Tiger was. It was a whole different thing. I mean, he certainly was introduced to the game at an earlier age as well, but he wasn't, in the same category at that specific point. But it was through his own drive and determination that led him to the player that he was. And he talks about, really some of the challenges that he faced coming out on the tour earlier on, because of course Arnold Palmer was, for lack of better words, the king. And, he had a lot of issues that he had to deal with, and sort of not necessarily prove himself, but just become the best player that he could be and not worry about what was going on around him. And he didn't have, of course, his father had passed away earlier on, so he didn't have the opportunity to have, somebody there pushing him all the time. He did that himself, but he did it for his own reasons, not because of somebody else. So,
Right.
There's a lot of things that have to be taken into factors. Guys, I want to thank you for very interesting Coach's Corner. I like some of the discussion that we had tonight, and I want to give you guys very quickly, John, I'm going to start with you this time, just a quick moment or two to let the folks know if they want to reach out to you or if they want to learn more about what it is that you do, where they can go, and how they can get in touch with you.
Sure. Well, you can go to my website, mentalgolfacademy.com, and on there is a lot of information about coaching options and some articles and things. Or you can also visit mikebender.com. That's where I do most of the work out of Lake Mary, Florida. Also, if you're interested, I have a book online, Golfer's Guide to Mental Fitness. It'll teach you tools and strategies to be able to take control of your brain and apply it on the golf course and lower your score. So you can get a hold of that on Amazon.
Perfect. And Pete, how about yourself? How can the folks get a hold of you?
I have a website too, plainsimplegolf.com. It's the plain is Plane, plainsimplegolf.com. All my contact information's out there, and they can read some of the writings that I've done and look at some of the different areas. And also too, if you don't mind me giving a plug, there's a new app that's come out called Pro Swing Tips that I'm also on. They can get the app from their app store, and it's a new on-demand online venture that's going on, and I'm one of the instructors in there, so they can also go that route if they want a little different avenue for what's going on.
Perfect. Well, guys, again, thank you very much for joining me tonight on Coach's Corner panel. As always, it's a pleasure. And John, I'll get that information to you after the program's over, and I would love to get a copy. But thanks again, and also, John, I'll reach out to you as well about coming on a different schedule as well when it's convenient for you. But thanks, guys, for doing a great job tonight, and I look forward to you guys returning again here on the Coach's Corner panel.
Thanks, Ted.
Thanks,
Have a great
Ted.
night.
Appreciate it.
All right, you too. Bye-bye. All right, that was my very special guest tonight on the Coach's Corner panel here on Golf Talk Live, Pete Buchanan and John Weir, two great professionals that have been in the game for quite a while. And John is really a great mental coach, and Pete as well likes to keep it simple but gets the results, and that's what's important here. Very excited to have, for a couple of reasons, to have my next guest, and I see he's waiting in the wings, so let me just read a little bit about him, and then I'll bring him on. His name is Mark Evershed. He's a great golf professional and was actually the Canadian PGA Teacher of the Year as well. And he grew up around legends like Mo Norman and George Knudson, also from Canada. I know you know both of those names. And Mark recognized at an early age his intense desire to understand the golf swing, and after studying the philosophies of greats like Homer Kelly and Persey Boomer, he created his own unique teaching style based on the premise that knowledge rather than muscle memory is the path to success, and that the lack of success comes from incorrect understandings as opposed to the lack of ability. And from that premise evolved Evershed's theory on the golf swing, a teaching system consisting of online video lessons, some training devices, books, and personalized instruction to help golfers understand and execute the golf swing. And by adopting his theory, he is confident that students will be successful if they understand the mechanics and sequence of the swing. His method has also led to an impressive list of credentials for him, such as teaching several PGA Tour players and being honored as mentioned earlier, the Canadian Teacher of the Year. He's had several TV appearances, including on the Golf Channel and Canada's Rogers Sportsnet, which is, of course, Canada's equivalent. And he was also multiple winner, 39 professional wins to his credit. and just a great guy, and been looking forward to having him come on the show here for the last little while. So without further ado, let me bring on my very special guest tonight, Mark Evershed.
Ted, how are you?
Good evening, Mark. I'm doing very well, Mark. How are you doing?
It's amazing what you can accomplish in about 100 years. I mean, it took me a long time to put all that stuff together.
Well, but that's the fun. But you had fun doing it, though, right?
I'll say yes on the program. I'll tell you what, when you're introducing it, was kind of really cool about, just bringing back memories of Mo. The time that I spent with Knudson, and one of the things I look at is I had no idea that I was with a legend or maybe the best of all times. It hardly ever crossed my mind until the last 5 years of his life.
Yeah. I had actually only one time in my life I had the pleasure of playing with Mo up in Carlisle. Of course, he used to, towards the end of his life, of course, Mo passed away several years ago. And he and another gentleman who I had the opportunity to play, in fact, that's how I met Mo, was through Nick Westlock.
Okay,
and
I have a
of course,
quiz
they
for
used to play. Yeah, go ahead.
Let me give you the quiz. Okay, how many tournaments did Nick Westlock win?
Oh gosh, I know it was a lot.
Give me within 100.
I'm going to guess that it was probably in the 80s.
How about 432?
Wow.
Amateur
now that I
tournaments.
didn't know.
And every single one was documented. Nick was how can I put it nicely? He was a rare historian that he had every one of his victories was documented, as well as Mo Norman's victories documented.
Right.
So Nick in his own right was pretty cool too. He gave me a wedge lesson once, so that's the only thing I can ever tell you. He gave me lessons wise.
Yeah, Nick was very interesting, and I'll share a very, very quick personal story how I came about knowing Nick. I actually dated his daughter Sherry for about 5 years, and met Nick through that ordeal. But anyways, lovely girl. But nonetheless, that's how I met Nick, and of course, how I met Mo was we were actually up at Carlisle on the driving range. Obviously several years ago, and I was hitting some shots, and Mo happened to come up in the golf cart, and he said, of course, to Nick, what are you doing, Nick? And he said, I'm just helping a friend of mine here, and he's struggling. I was struggling a little bit with a couple of shots, and of course, Mo, typical style, comes up and he tells you right away what you're doing wrong and what you should be doing and all that kind of stuff, and I just loved it. And it turned out that the two of them were going to play together that day. And I was really surprised because Mo would normally not do this. He said, why don't we have the young man join us, and I'll give him some more tips out so I got to play the 18 with him. And and that was the only time I got to actually play with him. But I played with Nick a number of times, obviously. But Mo was just a great guy. And I'll let you share some more Mo stories as we go along here. But let me just ask you, obviously you spent some time on the Golf Channel and Sportsnet over the years. Tell us a little bit about some of your experiences there and some of the things that you did on the show.
Well, it's very, very interesting. My life has been kind of interesting. If I were to start it, in 1980, my wife and I had a Down syndrome daughter. And the day she was born, they said she'd never make it past the mental age of 5, and she'd never get out of grade 1. So by fate, my wife and I found an alternative way of teaching. And so we started doing that. And that led me to the way I think now about how teaching should be. Well, long story short, my daughter ended up going through high school on the honors roll, which,
Wow.
I always use in my, it might not have ever been done in history before a Down syndrome person goes through high school on the honors roll, so when I look back and when I disagree with people or whatever, I like to tell them I have an honest reason to disagree because I've seen things that very few other people have seen, and so I kind of vamp it into my teaching of the golf of golf. So in about 1985, I got a call from a guy named Lee Siegel at the Golf Channel, and I was doing a television show called Golf Talk Live, and I was doing it me and the camera for an hour once a week.
Yep.
Well, that morning they called me and said, we want you to start wearing our clothes, and I was getting paid by another guy to wear their clothes, and I just had enough. I just said, I just don't want to do it anymore, so I kind of quit on the phone. And that afternoon, Lee Siegel from the Golf Channel calls me, and I'm all excited about that, and he says, Mark, one of the owners of the Golf Channel knows who you are, and we're coming to Canada, and we need some Canadian content. And by the way, do you know any women instructors? That's what he says. So I said, sure. I know Sandra Post and a bunch of, and da-da-da-da-da. And I said to him, well, what about me? He says, well, send us a resume. Okay, yeah, you know that one, right? So I sent him this letter, and I said, if you don't know who I am, then I don't really want to come on your show. Here's what I've accomplished in my life, and I gave him the lead up of my daughter. I told him the story about my daughter, and I sent it away.
Right.
And I ended it and said, if this isn't good enough, just throw it in the trash. And about 2 weeks later, Lee Siegel calls me, and he says, Mark, we want you to come on the show. So I go down and I do the show, and the phones went just berserk. So I go in the next day, and Lee Siegel says, I don't know what you've done, but we have never had a response like this ever on the Golf Channel. So
wow.
I had 1,800 emails come in that night. 1,800 came in that night. Maybe one of the first time anyone ever heard about lag pressure. And I said, if you want to hit the golf ball straight, you got to swing crooked. Okay, the phones lightened up when I said that. And then I said, the understanding is to move in such a way that the right wrist retains its bend as you go through impact. So I had 1,800 emails, and one guy says I'm nuts, and all the rest said I don't know what you said, but I liked it. Is what they would say, right? So January comes along, and I get a call from Mike Ritz, and Mike Ritz says, "Congratulations, you received the number 1 and number 2 show of the year."
Wow.
So they all aired. All the top shows aired on January 1st, New Year's Day, right? So I got the 8 o'clock and a 9 o'clock spot, and that's how the whole thing got started. But I want Peter Kessler's story if I can. This
go ahead. Yeah, I like Peter.
Yeah. Well, Well, I go down there, and Peter. Before you go down, Peter writes you a letter, says, "Send me everything you got about you." And I go, oh my gosh, I got a lot of stuff, and my swing theories and all that. It's pretty in depth. So I send it to him, and I go down there, and I don't know if he's read it or not, right? So I meet Peter, and we're on the show, and the cameras are getting into place, and we've got our makeup and everything on, and we're going on there, and Peter Kessler comes on and says, "Oh, and welcome to Golf Talk Live. We're here with Canada's Mark Evershed. Yeah, da-da. And Mark, what do you think of?" And we go on. We have this great conversation. I recognize that Peter's extraordinarily good at what he does, in that he reminded me when I needed to get back to what I was saying, because I can get going on a tangent sometimes. And then it comes time we're going to take a break. Yeah, and the guy behind the camera's got the 10 fingers up, going 10, 9, 8, 7, this kind of thing. And Peter's winding it down, and Peter says, "And we'll be right back with Canada's Mark Evershed," right? And the camera guy goes, 1, off the air. And Peter starts screaming. He starts yelling at the cameraman. He starts yelling at the producer. I'm going, what's going on? What's going on? I just go, what? He says, he's talking the camera should have been here when we were doing this, and you should have, and just go on. And then I'm looking at the cameraman, and we're coming back on air, and there's 10 seconds, right?
Yeah.
So he's going 9, 8, 7, 6, and we're down to 1. And then Peter turns to the camera and says, "And welcome back. We're here with Canada's Mark Evershed." And I'm so still if you watch the show, you can see I'm still in shock.
Right.
But I tell you what, incredibly smart guy, extremely professional. I came away with an awful, a great feeling about his dedication and his mind. I think we could do with more of him. But that was my Golf Channel. The other one I used. Yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Mark.
No, the Canadian one. I had my own TV show. It was just me and the camera, and then I did, like you say, the equivalent of Canada's Golf Channel, and I had that show for about 7 years. So we would do that, and an awful lot of fun. But I think the difference now is it's a whole new world out there. There's so much stuff going on in the golf world. It's incredibly hard to keep up to.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that here in just a second. One of the things, one of the reasons why I remember you so well is obviously being a fellow Canadian. But I remember when you had your show when it was just you and the camera, and that's not an easy thing. You were doing it really before the Golf Channel was really becoming a household name. And for sure. Golf Channel was certainly on, but there really wasn't a lot of. It was more infomercial and that type of thing at the time. And it wasn't really until Peter Kessler came on the Golf Channel and started doing his fireside chats with Palmer and Nicklaus and all the other guys that it really became more interesting. You got to hear a little bit about these guys, and the rest of it was just somebody flogging a product. There really wasn't much substance. Now it's all nothing but the tours, so you don't see anything else on there, and occasionally an interview. But you used to have. You would tell it like it is, and it brings me to a question. You're certainly not afraid to tackle controversial issues. Is that just in your nature? You're just somebody that believes, hey, let's get to the nuts and bolts of things, or are you somebody that?
What a great question.
Well.
That's a great question, Ted. That's a great question, and I have an answer for you. If you remember earlier, I was talking about my daughter Robin with the Down syndrome. Every doctor in Canada said there's nothing you can do about it. And then I found a place in Philadelphia called the Institutes for the Achievement of Human Potential. So we found out about them, and we drove down there. And I'll just give you the quick version of the story. I was making $7,000 a year as a young assistant golf pro. It was costing me $15,000 American to go down and help make my daughter well. What I learned from that is there's all kinds of stuff you can do if you're willing to do it. So the program with my daughter was, and this is the honest to God's truth, Ted, 16 hours a day, 72 volunteers per week, no days off for 4 years. So I came away from that going, don't tell me nothing can be done. Now, you may not want to do it, and if you don't, that's fine. I can live with that. You may not be able to afford it. I can live with that, but I refuse to believe that there isn't something that can be done. My daughter could fully read by the time she was 2 years old. So when I go, when I hear this stuff on Facebook and that about, all this learning and this new age learning, and I lived it for 4 years, I have a hard time backing off, adding in what I know. Sure, these guys have read a lot of books, but I lived it. So it's hard for me to back down. When I've sort of kind of been there, and my thing is this, Ted. I'm not looking for beginners, and I'm not looking for the masses. I'm really looking for guys that really believe in themselves, and they really want to get it. That doesn't mean you got to be a tour player. My biggest people are 50 years and older that are dedicated golfers that just really want to hear somebody say something different. So sure, when you say what you're saying, and you're right, I don't back away, but I also don't do it to intentionally be bad or anything. I just have my view.
No. So ask away. And the good, The good thing about that, though, Mark, is, and I like that as well. I mean, you know, you have to be willing sometimes to push the envelope a little bit in order to get the conversation going. And sometimes a lot of folks out there are afraid, you know, and I hate to use this term in today's environment, but, you know, everybody has become a little bit too politically correct for my liking. I mean, I believe there's a difference between, you know, intentionally trying to hurt somebody's feelings than giving constructive criticism. I think everybody should have constructive criticism as long as it's meant to be constructive and meant to be helpful. If it's just meant to be mean-spirited or what have you, then I don't agree with that. And this brings me to a point that really has bothered me, and I've mentioned it many times, is you look at the equipment manufacturers are a good example. You know, we see a lot of technology at the PGA show and some of the other golf expos out there up in Canada and here in the States. And what I want to ask you is, in your opinion, are a lot of the claims real, or is it just good marketing? And what should consumers look for what should they really be looking for when they're going out there to get themselves a new set of clubs or golf balls for that matter?
Well, I'll just get, again, everything that I say is just my opinion, right? And as you said earlier, it is just my opinion, and I am welcome to my own opinion. And I think that to answer your question, if the tour players thought that graphite and everything was better, they'd be playing it. You know, they can afford it, they'd be playing it. If lighter was better, they'd be playing it. It's not better. My problem is I think we have gotten too far away from it's you. It's not the equipment.
Yeah.
We've got too much in the like of buying a new. Hey, a putter is a blob of something on the end of a shaft. You make it go backwards. We're fooling ourselves to think that, you know, all this balance and we're fooling ourselves if we think that. Now, if you get a kick out of buying high-priced stuff, then cool. That's your kick. But, you know, I don't buy that makes you a better player. You know, I think that you have to take you know, we've gotten so far away from taking responsibility for ourselves. I mean, you know, nothing's my fault. I mean, just not, you know, it's all the equipment, and you know, we know better than that. So, the marketers have come along and they market what they think. You know, I think next year I heard somewhere that they're coming out with this new miracle material called wood, and they're going to start making clubs out of wood because they go farther than metal. I mean, I think that, you know, that's going to be the next. You know, so I think my thing in a nutshell is, Ted, it's you. You know, nothing's going to change. That you still got to swing it good. You know, you still got to hit it somewhere on the middle of the face on a good pack. You know, so that's, you know, all the other stuff is great, but this is just not my deal. I do this thing.
Yeah, and I agree with you. And I've said many times on the show, Mark, in this way, I don't have a problem if somebody wants to go out and buy the latest, you know, XYZ driver, but I want to make sure that they know how to use that club properly first before they go and treat themselves to that particular product. If they're going out there buying it as a game improvement club, then they're spending $300-400 that could be better spent somewhere else. And that's the issue that I have with it. And I understand about the equipment managers, and I understand how they want to promote their product and talk about you know, 10, 20, 30 extra yards. But the truth of the matter is the only ones that are really the only ones that are truly reaping those benefits are the guys out on tour because they know how to make a club work. Where, you know, a 25, 30 handicap can't take a $400 driver and get 10, 20, 30 extra yards in most cases. And it bothers me when the industry is so bound and bent on making money that it's frustrated the majority of golfers out there that they've been dropping out. And if they think that the stats are lying, that golf has declined in the last decade or so, then they're mistaken. And they know it's true, they just don't want to admit it. And part of the reason is because of the frustration level that a lot of golfers have had, is they're just tired of spending all this money and not getting anything in return. And that's why I wanted to ask, you know, your thoughts. The same thing with technology, Mark. You know, I'm all for, some of the latest, greatest technology out there when it's used in its appropriate purpose, and not as a way of attracting students. Because I said this to a gentleman that was on the show a couple of years ago. He's a good friend of mine, Tom Patry from Naples, and we were talking about this very thing about all of the equipment and all the technology, and I said, the truth of the matter is, Tom, is that if the power goes out or the batteries die, that equipment is no good. And if you can't teach without that equipment, then you're doing your students a disservice. Am I right?
Ted, God bless you for going there. Yeah, you know what? It's a heck of an argument, and I love the technology and what it can do for you in the hands of the right people. But my argument would be that anybody can get a bank loan and get a machine, and all of a sudden they're a great instructor. And the guys that are making money by selling the radar devices, they're going to call you all kinds of names and this and that, and they all gang up on you like a pack of dogs, and knock you down and everything. And they say, well, the guys are getting better, and again, that in the hands of, boy, is there a lot of guys out there fudging science. Just, you sit back and shake their head, and so it's a love-hate. And I had a discussion on Facebook the other day. I had a discussion about these young guys all think all this stuff is new, right? And I said to these guys, I had a machine like that before you were born. They don't realize we had. Do you know that 3D was invented in 1894? And the guy that talked like it was invented yesterday, and I go, oh my gosh! And it's kind of funny. One of the guys on Facebook said it was great the other day. He said, "Boots on the ground. You're not going to replace boots on the ground. Get all the technology you want, but you still got to teach a person how to." I had a gentleman from Canada who has a nice budget to teach his assistants how to become better golf instructors. So he hired me for a day, and he hires a lot of other top instructors to come do his thing. And I spent the day with him, and at the end of the day, the assistants said, Mr. Evershed, you taught us more with 2 2x4s than one of the leading, I don't want to say track.
Yeah, I know.
But one of the leading authorities on that could do us in a day. And you know what? And absolutely, but anyways, that may just be me. That because I've been around forever. So we're gonna get in trouble for mentioning that, but that's my opinion.
Listen, well, you know what? This is my show, so I'm not really worried. No, don't get me wrong. Don't misunderstand me. I'm like you. I love the technology too in its right context. I think what's happened, like anything else, Mark, is it's been abused. I think there's been individuals. Many of them, unfortunately, that have been led to believe that more is better, and they get all the bells and whistles, and they get out there, and the problem is their students' eyes are rolling in the back of their head like a slot machine because they're so confused with all the data and all of the information that they're being fed, which most of the information the student should never even see. It's for the instructor's own use. Yes. But, in a way of showing off and bragging about, hey, look at this, what this can do, the student is actually the one that suffers. So here's the test that I look at, Mark, as whether the stuff is truly working as well as it should be, is when, the guys on tour that are hooked up to these machines or what have you and using the latest and greatest equipment out there, they're seeing results in their game. But if you look at the handicaps of the average golfer out there, they've barely changed in over 20 years. So why is that? If this equipment is supposed to be giving them extra yards and is supposed to help them with their game, why are handicaps not changing, right?
Well, I give you my opinion. Like Mo Norman, Mo would always talk about comfort zone, right? He always talked about comfort zone. Right. And being around as long as you have been and I've been here, if I get it like a 10 handicap, I can almost guarantee you if he shoots 36 on the front 9, he's going to shoot 46 on the back 9. Don't even go bother go play. Just put 46 on your card and walk in. You know, there is the only way that you can really lower your handicap, like really lower it, is you have to know you know what you're doing, right? You can't, like, again, okay, so let's go down this road if you would, Ted.
Sure.
I'm always getting an argument that, well, you don't want to know too much information. I go, yes, I do. The only time I remember failing in my life is when I didn't get enough information. You know, and there's you know, but and then the guys that want to blow you out of the water, you know, they want to talk. I didn't say that I wanted to learn about keeping my elbows and everything. And who said that? I didn't say that. You know, why don't you let me finish what I'm going to say before you jump in and decide that I'm talking about keeping my head down? You know, so when I met Tom Masello, my story was this: I never won a single tournament until 1986. When I was 27 years old, I turned pro when I was 16. So, you know, and I was always a good athlete. I practiced as much as anybody ever did, and I never won nothing. I went down and spent 3 days with Tom Tomasello in 1985, the end of 1985, and I spent 3 days learning how to read the golf machine. I hit 50 balls in 3 days, cost me $2,500. Now I told you the story earlier. It cost me $15,000 a year for my daughter. Well, add $2,500 for golf lessons for 3 days in 1985. I came home. I won my very first tournament a week later, and won $3,000 during that tournament. Got my money back, and I'd never won before. And, you know, everybody knocks a golf machine, you know, and I don't know why they knock it. It's a fantastic – now, if you have a bad teacher, I get it. But you can have a bad teacher anywhere. Tom Tomasello rocked my world, told me things that I'd never heard before. I could instantly put them into play because he made it so clear for me. You know, does everybody know the golf machine book was never written to sell on the shelves for you to go out and read? You know, so it's just, I guess that's been what my life's been, Ted. It's always been about my daughter. Unless we ran to the institutes that taught us a new way, I would have never been able to do that to her. If I never ran into Tom Tomasello, I would have never won. And by the way, it's 37 tournaments, not 39. Somebody's exaggerating.
No.
But I won 5 out of 8 that summer that I played in. And I didn't play much. I was an assistant. I'm not playing pro. I just got up and played. You know, the other thing too is I could instantly hit it left-handed. Like because I put my brain.
That's not easy.
Well, the only reason I can tell exactly how I did it. You know, Tom Tomasello was the first guy that ever told me the whole damn game's in your hands. If your hands move correctly, everything else moves correctly. So I just put my brain in my left hand and I did the other way. Yeah, it's just you're not going to beat the old-time guys that know how to make swings work.
No, and you know, what's interesting, you know, just going back to the equipment real quick, you know, you hear about all these stats about these guys bombing, you know, the balls out there, you know, a mile, and you think about when guys like, you know, Nicklaus and some of the other players and Palmer, these guys with persimmon woods were hitting at 275, 280. There's actually, on record, I was watching this special a couple of weeks ago that they did on Jack Nicklaus, and they talked about one of the balls that he hit back in the 60s that was, I think, 314 or 320 yards. Mm-hmm. That's with a persimmon wood. That's not with metal, or that's not with, you know, titanium or anything like that. That's with a persimmon wood. That's pretty impressive when you're talking back in the 60s. So,
and
you know,
and the other thing that guys don't remember. Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I
would say this. I would say to start a conversation, not to end one, to start one. The best players back then were every bit as good as the best players are today. There are just not as many of them. And then the tech guys want to say, well, it's the tech that's making guys better. And you know what? It's the millions of dollars that is making guys better. You know, we have thousands of people trying from the age of 2 to get good enough to make millions of dollars. Back then, there was 100 guys trying to make a living. So my feeling would be, the Hogans, Nicklaus, Sneeds would be every bit as good as these guys are today, at least, and it might even be better.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I had the honor, Mark, a few years ago, before he passed away, of interviewing Billy Casper on the show, and what a great guy, and I to this obviously this day, I mean, he's gone now, but never had the pleasure of meeting him in person, but by chance I had an opportunity, and he gave me literally 2 hours on the show, and he was just one of the most humble gentlemen that I ever had the pleasure of speaking with at that time, and just very giving of his time, and you could just tell and hear the passion in his voice. He just loves this game and loves to give back. And as a result of that interview, I've become very good friends with one of his sons, Byron Casper, of course, who I'm sure you know through the golfing community as well. But just what a great, a great guy. But he was never, he was very humble, I guess, is the way that I would describe it. And I'm not saying this is a criticism to today's players, but I just, it's all about branding. It's all about identity. Where back then they just wanted to play, and it was all about just, supporting their family. And it was not a, how to become a millionaire. It was how to become a provider, and it was just to play something that they enjoyed doing, and they gave back so much. I mean, even to this day, with in fact, it was just earlier this week, Billy had they had his tournament, his annual tournament for Billy's kids out in San Diego at the San Diego Country Club. And so, here he is, 25 years, I think was there this year they celebrated. His tournament's still going, still giving back to his foundation. So, even 2 or 3 years after he's passing, he's still, giving back to all those that have helped him. But
the most underrated player ever.
Yeah, and I had an opportunity. He came on to talk about his book, The Big Three and Me, and he talked about that, and he shared, and I'll share it very quickly with you because I don't want to take all of your time, but very quick story, and I don't know if you know this or not, but back in the 60s, I think it was when he won, I think it was the 66, I don't remember what year it was, but I think he won the U.S. Open, or he was in the U.S. Open that year, and he, of course, you probably know or familiar, he was Mormon, and he was speaking at an event one of the evenings during that tournament, and a woman came up and approached him and said, my son's wanting to play professional, and so on and so forth. I'll keep this short. And she said, is there any advice? And he said to her, he said, just encourage him, just be supportive, and just basically be supportive. And the interesting thing about the story, Mark, is that woman turned out to be Johnny Miller's mother.
I was going to guess that.
And that's a true story.
Story.
It was in his book, and he shared it. Of course, he did a better job of describing it. But as a result of that conversation with her that evening, of course, she went back and did just that. It supported Johnny, and of course, Johnny's career from there. And as a result, those two became, best of friends. He admired Billy Casper for a lot of reasons, but just really appreciated what he gave to the game, and just they became very good friends, and still speaks very, very kindly and with great fondness of Billy even to this day. So it just goes to show you that the caliber of player back then, they were just all about giving back and just truly growing the game, but in a different way. Speaking of players, who do you like today? Who's somebody that catches your eye today? And you think, okay, this player here, male or female, doesn't matter.
My number one, Lydia Ko. I just love watching Lydia Ko. Not a golf swing or whatever. I just love her attitude. She looks like she's having fun. I just love her attitude. I just love watching her. It's hard. I respect the heck out of Dustin Johnson. Love watching Rory play. I'm trying to think of one of the things that I don't seem to is there a killer out there? Is there a killer out there anymore? Tiger was a killer. Right? I mean,
right.
Tiger was going to beat you up, spit you out, and I'm not sure that. I think Dustin Johnson is like a quiet killer. I'm starting to get that impression, anyways. Rory seems like, when he wants to play, he'll go and play and make some money and then go home. It doesn't, and they don't need it, right? I mean, if you got 10, 20, 30, $100 million in the bank, you certainly don't need it like you used to have to need it. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing or a good thing. Who else? Who I like? I like watching the guys that get way more out of their game than they should.
Right.
Like Jim Furyk. I love watching Jim Furyk. He shouldn't be that good. Who's Zach Johnson? I love watching Zach Johnson. Just because he's just
very,
a grinder.
very,
those are the guys
relentless.
I like watching. Well, yeah.
Now, what about?
Let
me change this to a different angle. Is there anybody out there that you think that they should be better than what we see out there? That you're thinking, hey,
I think
you're better than this. I mean, obviously that's an open door. But is there anyone that catches your eye that thinks, this guy or gal should be playing a lot better? They've got the game for it, but for something's holding them back. Whatever it happens to be, whatever your theory is, who name a player or two that you can think of off the top of your head that should definitely be better.
I don't think Rory should ever lose. I just don't think he should ever lose a tournament. I mean, he's got all this talent. And again, Sergio for sure. However, let's give him a little break. What an awesome win! Yeah,
fantastic.
That he came through. Maybe he's a late bloomer. It certainly could be him. But it's hard for me to. I just don't see any of the guys that look like there are too many guys that are comfortable. I guess maybe.
Yeah. A guy that I thought would be better, and don't get me wrong, I'm not trying to criticize him, a guy that I thought would be better. He just was an incredible striker of the ball, and he certainly did well earlier on, but you don't hear of him anymore, is Luke Donald. You hardly ever hear of Luke Donald anymore. I don't even know if he's playing.
Well, I think when I know that he is, but, I'm going to take that at a different angle. I'm unbelievably impressed with guys like, let's say, Nicholas or Hale Irwin or Tom Kite or Gil Morgan. These guys that it lasted so long. I think getting to that top level is one heck of an accomplishment. Staying there is incredible. We don't appreciate Tiger for his accomplishments as much as we should. You don't think he could have come up sick and gone yachting, when he was just barely going to make a cut or something? But he's just set the bar so high that we expect other people to do it. And I just can't see it being done. So I kind of like the guys that have had staying power, that have been around for a long time. I just think that takes a different kind of effort.
I wonder, Mark, if part of the problem is that a lot of the guys are not focusing on what they should be. And I'll give you an example. That maybe some of the guys out there, and Luke is a good example of it, that are focusing too much on the mechanics and the swing itself and not actually playing golf. Do you know what I mean? I think that they're focusing too much on perfectionism and not really playing the game. And like Lydia is a good example. I mean, she's a phenomenal ball striker, but she's out there having fun. She's enjoying what she's doing, and she's playing good golf. She's not focusing on making sure her elbow's in the right spot or the club is in the right position. She's out there having fun, and I think that's why she's successful. Do you agree with that, or what's your take?
Well, yeah, to a degree, certainly to a degree I do, and I think we're going to see, like the young guys are so into, like you say, the mechanics that I don't like. I love mechanics. I think mechanics are great.
Sure.
If they're the right ones. But we seem to, when we throw out the word mechanics, we seem to have a different vision than what I call mechanics. So, that's a long conversation. But sure, you're going to get guys that play good. They're going to be really good when they're good. But when they go bad, and you would think all the time they spent on the machines, they were the ones that shouldn't lose it. But they kind of the ones that do lose it, because they're looking for stuff. You know what? One of these days, I think we're gonna kind of get back to. I think Hogan was correct. You have to dig it out of the dirt, and one of the reasons you have to do that, we are playing a game where stuff breaks. Nobody's ever got it and kept it. So we're playing a game where stuff breaks. If you don't know how to fix it, you're kind of in a little bit of trouble out there. And what I'm meaning is I don't mean mechanics. I mean pay attention to what makes things work. When Hogan said dig it out of the dirt, that's what he meant. He didn't mean hit thousands of balls a day. He meant figure out what makes what. Here's if I could, Ted.
Sure.
When I first did the golf swing, I broke it down into pieces. I broke it down into your hands, your arms, your body, your sequence, and ball position. I broke it into pieces because Tom Tomasello was the only one that ever did this for me. He said when you have a distance problem, first place to look is your hands. Make sure they're working correctly. Second place would be your arms. Third place would be, let's say, your body. Okay, if you're hitting the golf ball crooked or offline, the first place to look is your arms. They're swinging off plane. And then I get ridiculed on, you got to learn it all in one piece. Well, if you learn it all in one piece, what do you do when it breaks? You go and you change the whole damn thing? If you break it into pieces and understand what each piece does, when the ball starts doing stuff you don't like, fix the piece that's broken, leave the other pieces alone. But it's simplicity. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the problems that we see with a lot of, especially with our amateur players. You know, they get out there, maybe they've taken a few lessons, and they'll get out in the golf course, and something just doesn't go the way they want it to go, and they start tinkering with every part of their swing. And the next thing you know, they're aiming 30 yards to the left. You know, their hands are in a super strong grip, you know, because they've been slicing the ball, so they're trying to firm up the grip. And, you know, and then they're swinging, you know, this way to out or that way to in or whatever in order to compensate. and, you know, by the time they show up for the next lesson, you're starting to think, is this a new player coming or is this somebody different? Because that's not the guy that left last Friday. You know, and that's the problem is I think that we've got to keep it simple and people have to understand. And instead of reading them off a bunch of stats and a bunch of numbers, I think people have to understand what the components and what the pieces do, as you just pointed out, what they do for the swing and why the ball reacts the way it does under certain circumstances. And I think when people have an idea of that, then when they get out in the golf course, they've got, you know, quote unquote, I hate to use this terminology, their quick Band-Aid fix. They've got it out there in the golf course with them because they know what the club is doing and what their hands are doing and so on and so forth. And instead of trying to find some quick cure off of the internet, and that's what a lot of players are doing, and I think that's also what's created frustration.
Let me ask you this.
Let's get back very quickly, if we can.
Go ahead.
Yes.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead. I just wanted to leave a few minutes here so we could talk about a little bit more about Mo, but go ahead. You have a question?
Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, well, yeah, let's do that, and you can guide me. At what point is simple just wrong? And whose job is it to decide what simple is? When I'm giving a lesson and I'm talking and I'm giving out information, who's going to jump in and say, you don't need to say that? How do you know what the person in front of me needed to hear? So these guys keep saying, keep it simple. How simple do I keep it? At what point is simple just not the correct information? So, you know, it's an argument. It's simple. Everything is simple once you understand it. But we keep trying to bypass understanding something, you know? It's like thinking nothing.
I think it's like
you've got to swing when you're thinking nothing.
Yeah. Right. I think what maybe a better way of doing it or approaching, I've got to disagree to a point. I think we have to keep certain things simple, but I think it's like working with building blocks. I think if we overload somebody with too much information all at once right from the beginning, they get overwhelmed. So I think that we have to be simple to a point to start, especially with I'm talking about a beginner golfer, obviously. You've got to start the process, I think, a little bit simpler in the beginning until you understand how much they're able to absorb and what their learning abilities are, because everybody is different. But I understand what you're getting at. I agree with the point. I think that you can't oversimplify in some cases and undersimplify in others. So, I mean, again, you have to treat everybody differently. You're different. You learn differently than I learn, perhaps, and somebody down the street learns differently than either one of us. So we have to take each individual. And that's really where the conversation, when it first starts with the player, is understanding what their needs are and then filling those needs. So it's like when you go to the doctor, you know, the doctor says, okay, well, what's the problem? You know, the doctor's not going to write, well, I shouldn't say that because some of them do, but he's not going to write out a prescription until he knows what the problem is. And unfortunately, some of them do. But you know what I'm getting at.
You just caught yourself there, didn't you? you just caught yourself there. But and I think it's a great. I think you're right. I mean, I think it's very common throughout different professions. You know, I'm a little bit lucky in that up until maybe this year, I haven't had a walk-in lesson in about 20 years. Everybody that comes to me because they've heard about me or my friend, and I usually spend days with people. You know, a 2-hour lesson is probably the minimum I'll do. So I've never been in a position where I feel like I'm rushed, that I got to get X amount of information in like say 30 minutes. So you know, yes. So I guess I'm lucky in that way. If I had 30 minutes to do, I'm not so sure I could get it in. Hey, you know what? We were talking about my TV show that I had, my live show. Do you know who took over that show from me? You know who took over that show from me?
No.
Sean Foley.
Oh, really? Wow.
When I left the show, Sean Foley took over the show. So, because we're both from Oakville. So even to this day, Sean kind of gives me credit for helping him with some of the ways that he does stuff. So yeah, so we're both from Oakville. So I thought that was kind of neat that we both did that show. So anyways, what do you want to know about Mo?
Very cool. Very quick note. I lived most of my life in Burlington. I was born in Hamilton, but I lived most of my life in Burlington. So we were neighbors. Let me ask you two quick questions. The first one is, in your opinion, do you think Mo was underrated as a player back in his day, or was it simply his quirkiness that sort of held him back?
He was not underrated by people that knew him.
Right.
He might have been underrated by people that didn't. I mean, I did. You know, I played 100 rounds of golf with Mo. I did an awful lot of clinics with Mo. He often would have me speak. And I remember when I was speaking, when he was hitting golf balls, I used to get angry because people were kind of laughing at him the way he talked and the way he dressed.
Sure.
They were not paying attention to where the ball was going.
Right.
You know, that always used to make me. You mentioned Carlisle once, right? The golf course.
Yes. Oh yeah.
Well,
yep.
When I was growing up, all the golf pros kind of sort of made fun of Mo, and that it was a quirk.
Sure
Nobody can do it like Mo. He doesn't know what he's doing. So one Sunday morning, I went up and confronted Mo, and I said, Mo, do you or do you not know what you're doing? So he spent 8 hours explaining his golf swing inside out and backwards to me, why his golf clubs were 6-iron lies, why he gripped them all at the same length, why they were E5 swing weights and the handles were big. Trust me, Mo knew exactly what he was doing.
Right. You know, it was interesting. Let me just add in, and I want to ask you the other question. Going back to when I was mentioning about being on the range, what was very interesting about Mo, talk about another guy that would just tell it to you straight. You know, I was hitting some shots that were less than favorable at the time, and this is going way back. But anyways, Mo came up, and Nick said to Mo, he said, you know, why don't you hit a few and help him out here? So of course Mo grabbed a 7-iron. And when I say a tight dispersion pattern, I'm telling you tight. Every one of those balls, I mean, you know what I'm talking about, right? Well, then he pulled the driver out and did the same thing. So I said to Mo, I didn't know Mo very well. I mean, I knew who he was and whatever, but I didn't know him to speak to him very well. And I said, so Mo, what, you know, based on what you're doing here, what would you advise me to do? And he just looked out and he said, you see what I just did? And I said, yeah. He said, do that. And that's all he said to me. Didn't get into it, but he, in his mind, he knew what needed to be done. And then he elaborated a little bit when we were out playing on the course. But that was how he was. You know, in his mind, he could see everything that needed to be done. But unfortunately, like you said, he didn't have the ability to relay it verbally as say you or I could do it. And that was what really held him back. And that's what got a lot of the joking and teasing that he got. And that's why people like Nick and and Gus and all the other people that surrounded him basically protected him, because there were a lot of people that obviously would take advantage. But what I wanted to ask you about Mo and yourself is, obviously I know you spend a lot of time with Mo. What did you learn from watching him that my listeners could maybe take away?
Well, you know what? To be honest with you, I didn't learn anything until it was way too late. Because Mo, like you just said, you were right on the button. Great analysis, by the way. Mo would walk by me when I was like 13 or 14 years old. He would say something to me and keep walking. And I wrote the other day, I didn't understand. What he wanted me to do is chase after him and beg him to say more. I didn't realize that until like 30 years later, where it was too late. So, he would say things. He'd walk by and he'd say, me, Arnold Palmer, Ben Hogan, Lee Trevino were the only ones in the world where our hands worked backwards through a golf ball. And he'd walk away. And I didn't chase him to ask him that sort of stuff, right? But when the thing that I learned about Mo is his attitude was he never saw anything bad. Every single shot was great. He never saw a bad one. He never looked up and saw a bad shot. He saw, that was pretty good. That was pretty good. Oh, it didn't go where I wanted it to, but it was pretty good. The way he would speak. Yeah. And I think just being around him was, what the most thing is, I grew up maybe around the best ball striker of all times, and I didn't know what I had. And I get so angry to this day, who in the heck gets that opportunity? But to me, Ted, when I first hung around Mo, he was only a good player. He wasn't a legend yet. He grew into the legend. Right, exactly. So, and by the way, it's not how straight Mo hit it. It's how crooked he never hit it. Right. I
what was funny?
One shot going crooked.
Yeah, I was funny. Years ago, I was talking to Nick, and this was when I forget who Tiger was working. I think he was already with Hank, or he might have moved on from Hank. But he was struggling. He was making some changes, and he was having some issues. And the driver was going left, right, and whatever. And Nick told me the story. He said that they were up at I think they were at Carlisle. They might have been at Brantford. And he said they were sitting around having a bite to eat, and Tiger was on, and they were showing the Tiger hitting the ball. And Nick said Mo didn't even look up at the screen, and he said he's lifting his foot up. He's lifting his foot up too much. And the funny thing was, somebody was sitting with him, and it might have been Gus. I forget. Somebody said, "Well, how do you know, Mo? You didn't even watch him on the skis." I know. He said, "I know what he's doing." The funny thing was, well, 3 days later, they said the very same thing on the Golf Channel when they were analyzing Tiger's swing that Mo said, and Mo didn't even look at the screen when that happened. That's, to me, just goes to show you the level of how much in touch with the golf swing and how much he understood golf in general, that he didn't even have to look at the screen to be able to make that analysis. And some of the best people that out there teaching, coaching, came to the very same thing after hours and hours of viewing his video. So that just goes to show you the man.
Like what you said earlier, though. Well, the problem again, what you said earlier, the problem with Mo is he looked funny and he talked funny, so it was hard for people to take him seriously. But as we got older, when Mo talks, you need to listen. And if you can't understand what he's saying, then you need to ask a question, because there's no doubt the man was extraordinary in many ways. But I wish I had him back. Now I know what questions I'd like to ask.
That's the thing. I agree with you. I'm very grateful and feel very blessed for the opportunity that I did get to meet him a few times, and obviously got to play with him that one time. But I would, and actually it was towards the end of his time, so he wasn't around much longer after that. So I like I said, I didn't get a chance to, other than a couple times to meet with him, but to play with him that one time. But I'll certainly cherish that. Mark, unfortunately, we're out of time. I got to have you come back.
Okay.
This has been a blast.
Please.
We'll do that. But let the folks know, obviously, the listeners know where they can, if they want to reach out or learn more about Mark Evershed. For the two people out there that don't know who you are, give them the goods. Where can they go?
Well, you got to go to www.evershedgolf.com. And what we did there is we put a thing on there. I have a pay-per-view online site. What we did is we put a promo code to give people 75% off if they go on there, and I think it's TedGolf75. It'd be the promo code to get to know me, to get to know what I do. I'm a great Google. Lots of people say good things about me. Lots of people say bad things about me, but lots of people do talk. So I mean, if they want to do that, that's where they can find me. YouTube. I'm kind of around there, but Ted, this has been a blast. I enjoyed the heck out of it. What a really cool show you've got, and I hope we can do it again real soon.
Well, for sure. We'll definitely have to do that. And I actually was thinking before you actually came on tonight, before your segment, I have a panel discussion. I had just a couple of guys on tonight. It's called Coach's Corner. And I stole the name from the old Don Cherry's Coach's Corner from hockey.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And that's what maybe came up with the idea. I thought, this would be great when we have a panel discussion. I do that every week before I interview my special guest. So what I was thinking, Martin, and we'll connect at some point here in the near future, but I was thinking that maybe what we could do is put together, and I'll let you maybe pick some other pros that that you want to come on with, and we'll do a special Coach's Corner panel, whatever topics you guys want to talk about, and maybe have a great panel discussion here on the show.
We could have a blast doing that, Ted.
Does that sound like a plan?
It sounds like a great plan. I think it would be very entertaining.
My sentiments exactly. I thought that would be fun. So I'll reach out to you in the next little bit, and I'll give you some prospective dates that I'm available. And like I said, we can put a panel together, maybe 2 or 3 others, including myself and yourself, and we'll come up with some interesting topics that we want to cover, and maybe get some listeners to call in on the show as well, and help them with their game. But I'll reach out in the next little bit, and we'll set that up. All right.
Thanks, my friend. Maybe we can talk about George Knudson another time too. I'd love to do that.
For sure. I'll have you back on separately for that as well. And I apologize. Okay. I forgot to bring that in, but I enjoyed the conversation, Mark. Thank you very much. You've been a great guest tonight on Golf Talk Live, and I look forward to having you back.
Thanks, Ted. Always a pleasure. I hope to hear from you soon.
All right. Sounds good, Mark. Take care.
Good night.
All right. That was my very special guest tonight, fellow Canadian golf professional Mark Evershed. Great conversation. I enjoy that. I like to mix things up every once in a while, and he's just been a super guest tonight. And I'm going to have him back on a special Coach's Corner, as we just talked about, and give you guys an opportunity to maybe call in and with himself and some other fellow professionals out there as well, and we'll get a good lively discussion going, I'm sure. But I just want to take this opportunity to thank, again, my Coach's Corner panel tonight, Pete Buchanan and John Weir. Thanks, guys, for doing a great job. And thank all of you, to my faithful listeners from all over the world, for faithfully tuning in each and every week to Golf Talk Live. I truly, as I've said many, many times, have a great amount of pleasure and enjoyment of having a number of highly talented coaches, teacher professionals, authors, and entrepreneurs stop by. And it's really through their participation and guest appearances that help make Golf Talk Live a first-class show. Special thanks to some of the sponsors and supporters of the show, Mr. Jonathan Laird from South Coast Golf Guide. Go to southcoastgolfguide.com and get the latest information on this upcoming guide that's going to be coming out here shortly. For all of the great courses here in the Southeast, Meredith Kirk Golf out in the South Carolina area, great teacher professional as well. Nikki and Tiffany Litherland, thank you for all of your support. Bernie Pinder from Ontic Golf, thanks again for all of your continued support. Sean Kelly from linkedgolfers.com, and Peter Doyle from Doyle Golf Solutions over in Ireland. Thanks, guys, for all of your support of the show. And again, especially thank you to my guests and to all of the listeners worldwide for faithfully tuning in. Don't forget to join me next Tuesday from 9 to 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time on the Women of Golf Show with LPGA professional Cindy Miller, and I will be here next Tuesday. And then again next Thursday, join me here from 6 to 8 Central on Golf Talk Live. God bless everybody. Have a great weekend. And don't forget to tune in next week to Golf Talk Live. Thanks.